Welcome to a walk through time and place. In the late 19th century, Eastern Europe was awash with German and Russian nationalism, fleeing poverty, autocracy, political and religious oppression, were the Ashkenazi Jews from Ukraine and Russia, arriving in the United States, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, only to arrive at the same time the White Plague was ravishing the United States. Like so many others, these Ashkenazi Jews fled the White Plague of the eastern seaboard, coming to Denver for the over 300 days of sunlight and the high-altitude dry air. These immigrants, looking for a better place and a new life, but afflicted with the White Plague, needed a hospital. They needed someplace, and they arrived at the JCRS Tuberculosis Hospital. The motto of the JCRS Hospital, established in 1903 and opening its doors in 1904, was, "He who saves one life is considered as if he has preserved the whole world." Yes, decades and decades before Schindler's List, this line from the Talmud inspired the JCRS Sanatorium. Walking into those original gates of the JCRS hospital to be saved from the afflictions of the White Plague. Later, the Solomon family erected the Isaac Solomon gates to the JCRS hospital. These gates have fallen, but the keystones remain. Later, a guardhouse was added, and still the Solomon family gave, establishing the synagogue for the JCRS campus. Walking into those gates, I can only imagine those immigrant families suffering from the afflictions of tuberculosis while fleeing Eastern Europe, arriving at this nascent but sprawling campus that has become the home to the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. Originally, just tents were established so that Rocky Mountain dry air could come in from all four sides of these tents to alleviate the symptoms of the White Plague. The first permanent structure was erected in 1906 on the spot of what is currently the Robinson Building. The leaders of this growing tuberculosis sanitarium were the great Dr. Charles Spivak and his friend Dr. Philip Hilkowitz. The Robinson family, known locally as a dairy conglomerate, donated and sold lands to the nascent tuberculosis sanitarium because they wanted to establish a sanitarium that would serve both observant Jews as well as people from all religious backgrounds. Spivak became the director and executive secretary, a position that he held from 1904 until his death in 1927. In that year that they opened those gates, 7 patients became the first to be treated at JCRS. That number grew to over 10,000 over the next 50 years. Those tents that were those first semi-permanent structures. One tent still remains on campus. While it's been moved and restored and rededicated, we can see what one of those tents might have looked like. We can see these tents were multifaceted, multi-used. One tent being used as an original lavatory. Later, the second permanent structure built on campus was the administrative building, what we now call the C.D. Spivak building. Erected in 1907, it's actually the only building on campus whose keystone is uniquely in English, not in Hebrew as well. The first permanent structure to be used for patients was the New York Ladies Auxiliary Building. The keystone was laid in 1908, and you can see on the left in this picture, Dr. Hilkowitz himself. Front and center, Rabbi Kovar. And yes, the great builder, Mr. Udovitz. The New York Ladies Auxiliary Pavilion was built in 1908. As I said already, it's the first brick structure to house patients. The structure of the building was designed so that patients could get that fresh air treatment, believed to be at the time the best cure for tuberculosis. Unfortunately, the great tragedy of the JCRS AMC RMCAD campus is the famous murder perpetrated by Russian violinist Isaac or Isidor Victor, who had such an unhealthy crush on the head nurse, Bessie Marrold, that he kept proposing to her and not accepting her rejection of his attraction and intentions. He murdered her, shooting her, and then trying to shoot himself, only to be stopped by other patients. He was put on trial, but his tuberculosis returned and he was sent back to JCRS, where he died. This building today is known as the Rotunda Building. It houses our mental wellness facilities in a very appropriate manner, if you will. The next permanent structure erected on the campus is the St. Louis Ladies Auxiliary Water Tower. It has dominated the landscape and the skyline of the campus for over 100 years. While it was established originally in 1910, it was redesigned in 1930 by the famous Dan McQuaid, later dying in that tragic Wyoming train accident. The dedication plate on the water tower says, from the Torah, "Spring up, O well, sing ye unto it, the well which the princes digged, which the nobles of the people delved." This water tower and well is dedicated to Clara Larson, and the water tower received major restorations in 2019. The next permanent structure erected on campus, and you can see on the left, one of those repurposed tents was, in fact, one of the original synagogues, but the Solomon family, yes, the Solomon family that built those gates, erected the first synagogue, originally known as the Jacob Solomon Synagogue. It was erected in 1911, unfortunately being destroyed in 1920 by a fire. After that fire, the Solomon Synagogue was rebuilt by the noted architects William and Arthur Fisher of Denver, Colorado. They designed a one-story brick and stucco synagogue with a Moorish style. It was completed in 1926 and was used regularly by the people of the JCRS campus and hospital. In these interior views of the synagogue, we can see the religious life and practice of the Jewish community of the JCRS. Today, the synagogue has fallen into disrepair, but we can still see the vestiges of this beautiful, beautiful synagogue. On the memorial boards, we can see the memory of the founders and the leading people of the JCRS hospital. Adolf Zettelbaum, one of the original doctors on campus. Isidore Hurwitz, the founder of the library, the first library on campus. Lewis Robinson and his family member Morris Robinson, descendants of that family that donated and sold that original property that became the JCRS AMC RMCAD campus. Max Neustetter, part of the Neustetter family, the same family of the Neustetter department stores. Solomon Bloomgarden, the great Yiddish poet. And of course, the great Dr. Charles Spivak. And still more. Isidore Rudy, the namesake of the Rudy Medical Building. Udelwitz, the great builder we discussed already, whose name has been used to rededicate that last restored tent on campus. Morris Robinson, of that Robinson Dairy family. Representative Ben Englander, who died in his first term representing the area of Lakewood and the JCRS AMC RMCAD campus in the Colorado House of Representatives. Dr. Philip Hilkowitz, Edward Neustetter, related to Max Neustetter, again, namesake of the Neustetter building on campus. And so many more. In 1912, the hospital laundry building was erected and dedicated to its patron, the Fishman family. That Fishman Memorial Building, used originally as a laundry, has been repurposed today as the Carpenter Building on campus. Sadly, there are buildings that we've lost that are no longer on campus. The St. Louis Auxiliary Staff House, one of the first buildings you would see walking or driving onto campus from the original Colfax entrance. That staff house, which we can still see in photographs as recently as 1979. The Denver Building, which we have lost but whose keystone we still have. The Isidore Hurwitz Library. The Solarium, much like the Rotunda Building, occupying the space which has now become the Mary Harris Auditorium. And yes, the second pavilion of the New York Ladies Auxiliary. And so many more buildings. That New York Ladies Auxiliary second pavilion became known as the Nurses Building. And you can see in the picture on the right, it sits on the site of what became later the Diamond Medical Building. The most significant structure on campus was the New York Building, erected in 1922. Having been plagued by multiple fires, it's been rebuilt multiple times. In 1946, Raymond Harry Irvin designed that extra 2 wings that is so famous for today. And that iconic Tower of Hope, looking out over the landscape. Outside of the water tower, probably the most premier site on campus, the Tower of Hope. Now in 1926, the post office and cooperative store was established. It was the center of life on campus. It was the business office, but the post office as well. The same post office that was dedicated to Charles Spivak after his death, when the area was renamed Spivak City in his honor. That building is today known as the Robinson Building. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see over the door there are no engraved terms. But on the picture on the right, after the 1980s, when it was rededicated to the Robinson family who had donated and sold the original property, their descendants, the inheritors of that dairy farm and that iconic brand name, Robinson Dairy, now the namesake of the Robinson Building. In 1927, and it might not be flashy, but it's important, that powerhouse was established. It was designed as well by the Fisher and Fisher architects. And just think, that powerhouse, as unflashy as it might seem, that one building supplies the heat for the entire campus through the series of tunnels and steam pipes underground. Within the powerhouse, perhaps the laundry room, the hospital staff would clean the hospital linens. The Fishman Laundry Building was for patients to do their cleaning, but the hospital must go on. The hospital must clean their bed linens as well. And in 1927, the Texas Pavilion for Women was erected on campus on the opposite end of the quadrangle of the New York Pavilion for Men. While the third floor of Texas was specifically a women's patient wing, the first and second floors were hospital space. These too were designed by the famous Denver architects Fisher and Fisher. That second floor was a surgical wing. And in the background of this photo, you can see the 5-paned X-ray panel, which would illuminate those X-rays of the patients. Today, those panels remain. They're part of our second floor Texas Building Student Lounge. The surgeon's office still remains. Today, it's the Foundations Office of the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design Foundations and Fine Arts program. But what's that in the right? In the upper right-hand corner, you can see it's a soap dish. It's actually one of the last vestiges of the surgeon's office of the Texas Pavilion for Women. In 1936, the Triborough Dining Hall was erected, again by Fisher and Fisher. That original Triborough building was established to be the patient's dining room, a kosher kitchen for Orthodox and traditional Jews. This same space that was once a dining room is now the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design's library. The original Triborough Dining Hall has been repurposed and repainted over time, at one point being office space for AMC President and Dr. Thomas Slaga. And today it is home of the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, Library and Learning Commons. The Rudy Medical Building was erected in 1919. And you can see there Adolf Zettelbaum, the first man to be remembered on those memorial boards in the Solomon Synagogue, was there on that day, laying the cornerstone of the Isidore Rudy Medical Building. That medical building became the center of clinical laboratory and research for the JCRS Tuberculosis Hospital, as well as the AMC Cancer Research Facility. In fact, here you can see this original photo from the JCRS Laboratories Bulletin, as well as this less clear photo that if you look carefully through the doorway, you can see the staircase. This is the basement classroom, which is now the art education classroom in the Rudy building. Today, the Rudy building houses the Rudy Gallery, the Interior Design Library, classrooms for modeling, a photography classroom, and an art education classroom as well. If you remember when we were looking at the memorial boards of the Solomon Synagogue, I mentioned the Neustetter family. Max Neustetter is the namesake of the Neustetter Rehabilitation Building, erected in 1926. It was the home of the JCRS print shop and bookbindery. Here we can see on the left the first class of bookbinders. These would be patients who, as part of their exit from the tuberculosis hospital, were trained to have work skills which could lead to employment. And here on the right, a much more clear photo of that bookbinder shop in operation. And today, the Neustetter building is home to RMCAD sculpture classrooms. It's kilns and is used for foundations classes as well as fine arts. At its peak, the JCRS campus was 105 acres and housed a dairy farm, chicken houses, laundry facilities, a pharmacy, treatment rooms, residences, operating rooms, a hospital, a dental office, a print shop as we talked about, a library, a post office, a general store, and yes, a synagogue, the heart of the campus. Here are a couple of pictures of that JCRS farm north of the current campus of the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. In the later years, JCRS erected the Mary Harris Auditorium. Ground was broken in 1941. And yes, in that World War II era, the great Bob Hope performed at JCRS. In 1954, because of the victory over the White Plague of tuberculosis, the JCRS hospital repurposed itself to fight a new battle, to fight cancer, and became known as the American Medical Center at Denver, later the AMC Cancer Research Center. But with these new directions came new needs. And so in order to raise money to repurpose itself, in 1957, 20 acres of the original campus on West Colfax, as we saw that original entrance was, were sold off and became known as the JCRS Shopping Center. With that repurposing and that new source of income, new buildings were developed. The Diamond Research Laboratory was erected in 1963. The Diamond Jubilee, if you will, of the JCRS Hospital established in 1903, whose doors opened in 1904. To make room for the new Diamond facility, the nurses building, seen on the left, was demolished, and on the right photo, you can see the new foundation of the new Diamond building, being part of that new trajectory of the AMC Cancer Research Facility. Here's a photo from 1979, and you can see the AMC campus. You can see that new Diamond building on the right. Later, the EPIC building, the Experimental Pathogen Center, was erected. Later remodeled for RMCAD purposes in 2011. Today, it's home of illustration classrooms, graphic design classrooms, a student gallery, as well as a photo lab and Photo Studio One. In 1993, AMC erected the Maury L. Shore Helen Claire Goodwell Chapter Annex. It's an annex attached to the Isidore Rudy building to make the Rudy building ADA compliant, as well as to create more space on campus for offices and laboratories, and now classrooms. In 2002, AMC merged with the University of Colorado, and the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, established in 1963, bought the property and moved in a year later. Today, this beautiful and historic JCRS AMC campus is now home to the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. Perhaps one of the most notable contributions has been the 35-foot geodesic dome built by former faculty member Bruce Price and a group of students to pay homage to the legacy of Drop City. that community that was established in southern Colorado in the 1960s, which in and of itself is an amazing historic continuance of the traditions of the Bauhaus movement and Buckminster Fuller and his friend Clark Richart. From the Robinson Dairy Farm to Edgewood, from unincorporated Spivak City to the incorporated city of Lakewood today, the history of the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design reflects the history of Colorado.